Hi there, and welcome back to LeWeb' Paris at what is the end of day 2. Another long but richly varied day here at LeWeb. And the last guest for these Google Plus and Euronews Hangouts is Duncan Osborn, who is the product manager of the Google Cultural Institute, which is based here in Paris. Duncan, we're also joined by Antonio, Portuguese originally, but in Ireland.
Hi, Antonio.
We welcome
Hi.
back also Benny,
Hello, nice to meet
Hey,
you.
Benny. Good to meet you.
as well as Michelle from Tallahassee, Florida.
Hey,
Hi.
Michelle. I grew up
Hi.
in Georgia. You're a neighbor.
Okay, good to meet you.
So the Google Cultural Institute, born of the Google Art project. Originally, it was one of the 20% projects, but that has now become, I guess, a 100% project. And it's also not supposed to make profit. That must give you a certain amount of liberty that perhaps other parts of Google do not have.
That's definitely accurate. So, yeah, we did start as a 20% project. I think it's really powerful that this began as 20%, and now within this thing that's become 100%, we have other 20% projects that begin there. Cardboard actually began as a 20% project within the Cultural Institute. And so that gave birth to a lot of different products now. And certainly the fact that we're nonprofit, first definitely aligns us with our partners, without whom we couldn't exist. And second, does mean that we don't have to have a certain set of constraints with having to generate revenue. Clearly, the development of new technologies can be indirectly monetized by the company, so that still gives us a lot of power in terms of the impact that we can have for a company that does have shareholders. But at the same time, we do feel fairly liberated to be able to just kind of exist in our bubble and create value for a specific set of people without the additional constraints that come with having to generate revenue.
And as the mission of the institute is the democratization of the arts, of the art world, can we assume that will always be the case, that the institute will never seek to generate profit, with democratization and profit not being contradictory, but not exactly being bedfellows either?
Certainly. It definitely isn't in our current plans to begin generating profit.
Now, there are three. You're the product manager, and there are three products which you spoke about just now in the session. The first of which is the mobile apps. You've launched 11 mobile apps. There's the Chromecast backdrop, and there's Cardboard, which some people will already have heard of. But could you explain a little bit more about those three products?
Sure. So we're launching 11 apps today. Those are with partners in France, all over Europe, and really across the world. In addition to 4 additional apps that already exist from Brazilian partners. So those are all now available. The concept there is actually not where you would expect us to focus our effort. Instead of doing something that is outside of a museum, these apps are actually useful within the museum. And so in a sense, it's a virtual tour guide, which for us aligns us directly with our partners who have all this expertise, but it's hard to put that all over a museum experience. You really only have the one sign next to a painting, and so that's really powerful that we can give even more context when you're exploring a museum. The second one is Chromecast. This is one of my personal favorites only because normally when you have a TV, if it's off, you have this giant, extremely expensive black rectangle. And so it's really cool to be able to have a use for that, and especially one that's so enriching, to have art in your living room. Clearly it's a little cheaper than buying a Monet, and it also gives you access to a lot more content than from museums all over the world. So you get a very diverse experience of the art content that we have. And the final one, of course, is Cardboard, which is cool in how off the wall it is. The fact that it's made out of a material which you wouldn't exactly consider to be industrial grade, which makes it very low cost, and especially the fact that it's open source. I mean, it's very powerful, not just for Cultural Institute, even though that's what we use it for, but for the entire world, being able to create virtual reality experiences without having to buy really expensive hardware.
So with Chromecast, how does it work? Do you plug something into your TV?
Mm-hmm. So Chromecast is a thumb-sized, approximately, for someone with bigger thumbs than I do. It plugs right into the HDMI port on a TV, and once you have it plugged in, you can then stream content straight from an Android device, from an iOS device, from a computer, music, video, whatever other content you'd like to see, and right to the big screen in your living room. And so that happens when you're actively wanting to watch something. But when you're not watching something, that's when the magic happens with Backdrop. And that product allows you to see kind of a passive or ambient display of content that just kind of revolves in the background when I don't have my eyes directly on the TV.
And how do you select the content that you'll see on the Backdrop?
Yeah, so there's an app called Chromecast, and you launch the app. It'll give you a quick little prompt to tell you, hey, there's this feature available. What would you like to see on your TV when you're not watching your TV? And so that allows you to select a number of different things, not just culture, which is the art project, which is enabled by default, but also things like news, weather, satellite photos, and photos that I have in my own Google Plus stream.
Well, let's go to the participants we have a little bit everywhere. Let's go to Ireland first, where we have Antonio.
Hi, nice meeting. It's a very interesting project. Besides the work I do, I have a sort of a online project on Twitter that we talk about people with accessibility and disability. So I'm really interested in that range. How people with accessibility can actually engage with this experience. How can they, people who have difficult moving or they're in their homes, how can they have the full experience? What type of work have you done to make this app available for them?
Sure, it's a great question. The fact that a lot of our content is visual actually presents a very important challenge, right? So the first thing that we've done is when we have that mobile app, it's not just the visual of the artwork itself. So we also have audio guides and we have video. So those are two different ways to get kind of the background of what you're trying to see. And in general, with the Android platform, that gives us a lot of power to take advantage of the things that we've done on the Android platform to make accessibility easier. So overall interface cues, high contrast displays, all of those things are utilizable by the apps that we have on Android. So I can't claim to be the expert on all that's happening on the Android front, but all of those come through in the mobile app. And just in general, having several different kinds of media when you're exploring cultural content in a museum via the mobile app allows you more options to still take advantage of the content we have.
Okay, thank you.
And it's also it also enhances the experience of being in the museum. What extra we'll be able to get with these mobile apps once we're inside the museum?
Yeah, so if you think of what you can see in a museum, you can have objects, you can have paintings, you can have a whole lot of content, and we certainly don't want to replace that experience. It's actually pretty important to us that we don't try to supplant it with something else. But what we can do is for things that where you see an object but you can't get very close for preservation reasons, or especially if there are lots of people in the museum, you can zoom in and see more about something that you wouldn't necessarily be able to see from just being there in person. And in addition, just the content that we have is in addition to what's available in the museum. So our partners have curated these exhibits with additional information that you won't necessarily find. So audio guides, additional historical background that isn't necessarily available just by looking at the thing. So we've tried to bring a layer on top of the content there without creating a new experience so that someone would be more interested in looking at a mobile app than looking at the things that you see in a museum.
Okay. Benny, we'll go to you.
Sure, thank you. I understand you guys don't really have to create revenue, but with the incredible detail you offer online and the Google Cardboard experience, it seems like you're taking away paying customers from the museums. It seems to me it's the better experience. Yeah.
It sounds like your question is, how are we trying to replace the experience you would get in a museum?
It's more like, or maybe the museums must have had concerns about that because they're probably reliable on the ticket fees and that stuff.
Yeah, this is a concern that comes up fairly frequently, and several years ago that was actually a real fear on the part of museums that putting content online keeps people out of physical spaces. I think most people who have been to a museum understand there's a slightly different experience, even worlds different in terms of how you consume a painting when you're standing in front of it and how you would consume it in a digital world. There actually is a three-dimensional aspect even to paintings and the texture that you can't quite get from a digital experience that we try to do as well as we can with cardboard, but we haven't gotten to the point where it's an exact copy, and I'm not convinced we ever will. So there definitely is value to be added by seeing something in person. Really what we'd like to do at the Cultural Institute is give people the volition or the desire to go to a museum after they've seen, in a sense, a preview of what the experience would be in the museum. And VR helps us because then you can not only see the works of art, but also the entire environment that you would see. But still, with a headset, you won't feel quite as you're there, and you certainly will still be seeing a static image in virtual reality, whereas it's very different to be in a place where you have the entire environment of people speaking around you, to be able to see artwork directly, to be able to walk around a statue and be able to see how the light plays across different pieces. All of these things are bits of nature that we haven't been able to reproduce yet digitally. So for partners, they've gotten used to the fact that putting things online serves only as an encouragement to come to the museum. And we've definitely seen several concrete studies seeing folks who have put content online and found that actually increased visitorship, which is really encouraging for us.
So what quantifiable evidence, if any, exists, or even feedback from the directors of museums since their collections have been put online? Is there any quantifiable evidence or results, and what is the feedback that you're getting from directors?
So the feedback for us is indirect in that we don't have access to their visitor numbers and other such metrics, but we do have their impressions about whether they would like to continue to be a partner of the Cultural Institute, and that feedback has been very positive, in that this is a healthy influence on the world of culture. Obviously our role to play is more to support them in the mission that they have in increasing accessibility to the culture that they have in their institutions. And their continued partnership is probably the best endorsement that we have, that this is a healthy project and something that they're very pleased with.
Sure. To Michelle, sunny Tallahassee.
Thanks so much. I love this. I love the concept of the Cultural Institute. I think it's great. I'd be interested in knowing what kind of, particularly I work in urban communities a lot where I didn't even know this existed. Are there any kind of outreach efforts to make sure that more communities are aware of this?
Yeah, definitely. So especially for urban outreach, the first thing that comes to mind is the partners that we now have in places that are the kind of the beacons in the world of street art, and that definitely was a project that exposed us to probably an entire new set of viewers. And incidentally, before I joined this project, that was my first exposure to the Cultural Institute. I went to school in Atlanta, where that's a really present form of art, and so to see that, in this way that you can explore in the manner that we use to explore more traditional forms of art was really powerful for me. And I can see that as well, with the partners that we have providing street art. They have also been very active in doing outreach to the community and helping people explore urban spaces from an art point of view. And so that's specifically on street art. And then just in general, the fact that we have a lot of partners that use our products for education. So we have user galleries, which many teachers use to put together exhibitions for students. The cardboard, we've seen instances of that being used in education. So all of those, in an indirect sense, are being used as educational tools, which we're really proud of. Cardboard,
again, was another 20% project that that got lucky and was made into a 100% project. Is it how direct an answer was it to what Apple have been doing? What I mean by that is that it seems a bit cheeky, in fact, to bring out a product made of cardboard, to perhaps suggest that what Apple are doing is perhaps a little bit pricey, a little bit fancy, or was it just simply that it's a cheap material that anyone can use? Is that where the idea came from?
The origin of cardboard is actually the fact that in Paris, at the Cultural Institute, we have what's called the lab, and there are a bunch of tools like laser cutters and 3D printers, and actually just having access to those tools was the origin of the idea for cardboard. You know, using the tools that I have right upstairs, what can I create? And so it was that kind of sense of discovery, like how can I use all these basic materials to create something that I would enjoy. And I think that's actually the cool thing about a lot of 20% projects, is it's something that, you know, how would I use this, and how can I, you know, create something using just what I have available to me. And you know, I think there are certainly merits to much higher priced virtual reality displays. Things that we can't do with cardboard. We have constraints around the materials, but also just the fact that it runs off of a smartphone is a ceiling for the kind of performance we can get. So I know the guy who invented it, and it really was kind of the sense of discovery, like how can we do something using a material that hasn't gotten a whole lot of love in the technology world.
Yeah, it must have been a pleasant surprise for him to present a product made of cardboard and to get such a positive response from it. We've got lots of questions from Nicolas Charbonnier that have come through Google Plus. I'm going to choose one at random because he literally has sent dozens. With regards to the Chromecast backdrop that we were talking about, is it possible to customize the Chromecast backdrop experience to slow slideshows of user-submitted galleries? I think a 4K experience, he says, will be the killer app for 4K. So how about an Android app for 4K Android set-top boxes and TVs? It's just there, that question.
Sounds like a great idea to me. Certainly, so right now we don't have the possibility to add user-generated galleries to Chromecast. The reason for that is we've had to make sure that every one of those images looks great on a TV. We've selected the images in collaboration with our partners to find a set of content that looks really nice. Right now we haven't opened it up to the kind of non-curated approach where we would let anyone just kind of create a gallery and then have that run through the experience. It's a great idea. Certainly being able to customize it more finely is something that we're thinking about.
Mm-hmm. And the question down here: do you provide a pack for any museum in the world to get the app and digitize their content for free? How do you go about approaching museums?
So our museums are our partners, and we don't have a product without them. So approaching them and maintaining relationships with them, we have a whole team of folks who take care of that at the Cultural Institute. They're fantastic at what they do, and they're especially good at giving us feedback from museums about how to improve products so that they serve exactly the needs of museums. In terms of a pack, it's every museum is different, so it's hard to get a single something we could dump in a box and send to someone. And we're also fairly careful to have a very hands-on experience with museums so that we cater to their needs. So we don't have a pack per se, but we definitely have a set of tools that we'll tweak for each museum and make sure we give them exactly the things that complement their kinds of content and their specific needs.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, let's go back to the Hangout guests. Let's go in reverse order. So starting with Michelle.
I just wanted to ask a question. You kind of hit on it a little earlier about the street art. I was going to ask, is there an opportunity, with news issues that are coming up, great artists coming out of some of the uprisings we've had just across the country as it relates to like race relations and things like that. Are there outlets for those type of things that are captured to kind of be put in a gallery, kind of like the gallery of life, so to speak?
The breaking news of art. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you know what I mean?
That's a fantastic idea, actually. I've never thought of that, and I've never heard anyone talk about that. That's awesome.
Okay, remember Michelle in Tallahassee. Yeah.
That's a fantastic idea. Well, as I said, we are not on it. Clearly, I'm doing my job very poorly. But definitely having a more real time is really exciting. Street art tends to be much more modern by definition than any of the other content we have. So there's a sense of current events actually. When you go through the collections, you can almost see news events evolving, especially because street art tends to be more direct in terms of the subject that it's approaching. So you can almost feel that just by virtue of the art itself. We haven't created an experience around that to get kind of a stream of what are the things being generated around the events of today, which would be really cool.
That would be.
Let me think about it and get back to you.
Please. Thanks.
And we can credit it to Michelle Tallahassee.
Yes.
Let's go back to Ireland, Antonio.
I'm quite curious if you guys have a roadmap, and what type of museums can we expect to see in the future?
Yeah, definitely. We have obviously we have a long roadmap of partners coming in. The types are we tend to be pretty diverse in the kind of institutions we have. Not just museums for visual art, but also street art tends to be a good example of a very distributed kind of partner, where their content isn't even in a gallery necessarily. Partners that tend to be more architecture, so buildings. We also have sculpture. We have some partners who have been working on objects. So it's fairly diverse, and the partners that we have in the roadmap tend to be diverse as well. One of the really cool ones is the Comic Museum in Belgium. That very different from some of the other content we have. So there's not really a certain type that we're pursuing in particular. Anyone who's a credible cultural institution, we're more than happy to discuss becoming a partner.
But are we expecting to see museums from Greece and Italy or any other country in the south more present in that gallery? We already have several partners in both countries. We even have a recent project which is called Made in Italy, which is art, but also more on the line of crafts and culture that comes from things like even salami we have represented. So it's a whole set of content created from institutions who maintain a very different kind of culture than you would expect to see in a museum, which is really exciting. And so both of those countries are represented, and we certainly are pursuing countries where we don't have too much representation. We have people actively thinking about how we can increase our presence.
To what extent is the Institute working with schools or educators rather than museums to bring a new generation of art lovers into the museums? And
education is a huge piece of art, and just in general, you talk to any museum curator or museum director, and education is one of the pillars of how they think about their place in the cultural landscape. And from our point of view, that's something that we help by helping the institution. We tend to make sure that they have tools that they can use for educational purposes. Definitely just the ability to do a gigapixel zoom is fascinating when you're studying the technique that someone uses to create a painting. VR is a really awesome way to be able to travel without transporting an entire classroom. Certainly certainly the user-generated galleries have had a lot of traction in education. If you look through the list of those, sometimes you see them with course names. Clearly, it's a tool already being used by folks to, whether for school projects or even by teachers, to create an entire curriculum for a class. And so, from what we've seen, it's actually a pretty powerful set of tools for education.
The base of the institute's in Paris. What's your presence elsewhere in the world?
We have folks in Paris and folks in London. A few folks in Mountain View who work with us. And as with any project at Google, there tends to be a lot of relationships with other teams. Chromecast is a great example. So we tend to have plenty of friends just about everywhere who are working indirectly or directly on Cultural Institute. So that's actually been one of the most exciting things. It's really nice to see people's eyes light up when you talk about, hey, how can we include cultural content that we have in other products? And so that's why we're starting to see integrations with Chromecast and places where we can really diffuse the content that we have in other products.
I've got one more question before we go back to the guys. Now, as the world kind of engages more with technology, and I'm thinking particularly kids who are going to be tech natives, who are going to grow up with technology, do we risk seeing the art of, I don't know, painting, oil on canvas, kind of going into decline? Do we risk losing painters to the digital world, do you think?
We can always lose users of one medium to another medium. If you think back to tempera on wood, kind of gave way to oil painting. And certainly we see kind of movements in media that evolve, but at the same time you see people still painting with tempera in modern times. I think actually maybe the role that we can best play is by preserving knowledge of those methods, that maybe we can make sure that even as movements evolve, the knowledge of what came before remains intact. And so if and when digital methods come up, I hope that we can help to also preserve the past and help people have access to knowledge of how art was always formed and even try out those different methods for themselves.
What I particularly liked in what Amit Sood was saying, that the director of the institute, was the part about the son of Marc Chagall, who this is something that everybody learned, that he was in the painting that's in the Palais Garnier. So we're actually learning things thanks to this technology that otherwise would have remained secret forever, I guess. Okay, well, guys, we've got time for a couple more questions. I suggest, I don't know, put a hand up first, because your mics are off. Or go with Michelle. And then Benny. Michelle, Benny, then Antonio.
Well, again, I'm just impressed by the Cultural Institute. I think it's going to be great as it does expand. And you touched on a little bit earlier about your outreach efforts and just really getting into those schools. What kind of immediate things are kind of like your next? What's in your next steps? What kind of things can we see coming?
First on the list is holiday break.
Okay.
So we have, clearly this is our first big mobile launch today. Mobile is definitely a theme for us as we try to figure out how we can complement cultural experiences with a mobile device. As everyone else has discovered, this is something that's always with you, and how can we use that to introduce little moments of culture throughout your day, I think is something we're actively thinking about as well. And then just in general, kind of on two fronts, I spend my time, building new products, but the other big piece of work is making sure that we have more partners and more types of content represented. I think it's really special for folks from any country to go and see their country represented, or the museum around the corner to be available online. And for folks on the opposite end of the spectrum where it's so far away that maybe they would never get there. And so that's ongoing work. We have great traction, but we still have a long way to go.
Awesome.
To you, Benny.
Yeah, so I love the fact that I can find all those art pieces online. But are there any governments that are especially hard to convince to digitize their artwork? Or maybe I should ask the other way around. Are there any governments that are very easy to convince?
I'm hardly the expert here. It tends to be an equation, both the government and the institution itself. Obviously, both have to be amenable to putting content online for a relationship to work. And the fact that we have such a diverse set of relationships hopefully shows that this is generally a positive thing that the governments and institutions are both happy to participate in. And I certainly hope that continues to be the case.
And then, Antonio, do you have a last question or message for Duncan before we wrap up?
I think, I'm curious to know, you know, you have to work with so many different people, with so many different museums and in many different spaces. Is there any interesting challenges that technically that you have came across that you think, okay, this is very interesting to share?
Do you mean technical challenges from the engineering point of view?
Yes.
I'll tell you what. I'm hesitating because there are too many. Here's one. When was the last time you went in a museum and said, "Wow, I'm so glad this Wi-Fi network is so good"? Some museums are great with Wi-Fi, but usually it's not the first thing you think of when you're thinking, "How can I improve the experience for my visitors?" And maybe that's a good thing. You know, maybe a few less ringtones is what they're hoping to get. So in general, you know, we have to think very carefully about, if we're in the mobile space, what can we do to have an offline experience as well? And that's really tough when we want to, for example, have, in case you saw the demo with Gigapixel, that zooming requires, you know, loading more data as you get to higher zoom levels. And so when you get to that level, you know, if you don't have an internet connection, you're in trouble. And so we have to think pretty carefully about how that experience works and how we can, especially if we want to increase the quality of data that we serve, that comes at an expense, which is obviously the size of the data that we send. And if you're traveling, another question you probably never asked yourself is, wow, why do I have so much data that's so cheap in this foreign country? Which is another challenge. So both of those, just in general, the bandwidth that we use to serve the content tends to be a big challenge in terms of how we can balance great experience with being a practical one. And so that comes up at least once a day.
Well, listen, the products that you've got coming up do sound really exciting, and the mission of the institute as well. It's difficult to find any negatives in it. Thank you very much for your time, for coming to join us, and thank you also to Antonio, to Benny, and to Michelle. Now we're going to be back tomorrow for the third and final day of LeWeb 2014, and it's our next, and it will be our last Hangout with Brian Solis, the principal of Altimeter Group, and that's at 11 o'clock Central European time. If you want to take part in that Hangout, Euronews.com, follow the signs to LeWeb from the home page, and there's a registration form that you can fill in. It's at 11 o'clock tomorrow, Paris time. So all that's left for me to say is have a very good evening or a very good afternoon in Tallahassee, and see you tomorrow, hopefully.
Thanks for joining, guys.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.